Could you use a hug today? I know that it's rough out there. What if that hug was from a Disney princess? And what if that Disney princess looked like you? There is an unofficial, semi official rule in the Disney Kingdom, visiting Disney World, Disneyland, that the characters who walk around the parks in costume, when hugged by a child or a guest, I guess, of any guest, are not to release the hug until the guest releases first. So you're hugging, you're hugging, you're hugging, and until the child, especially, releases the hug, the Disney character will continue to hug the child. Thanks for joining today. You are here. I'm Michelle Talbert, the host of We All Win, the podcast that is the inspirational podcast for aspirational women. And today we are talking about a post that I didn't expect to do what it did on LinkedIn, but not so much about the post as it is about representation and connection. When I was pregnant with my son, who was born in April 1989, so needless to say, we weren't doing gender reveals back then. We did not have that much technology. I think they may have asked me if I wanted to know if he was a boy or a girl, and I said no, but I can't even remember now if that was even an option, but I think it might have just been a potential option. But I chose not to know the gender. And so I knew in my mind, though, that if he was a girl, I'd name him Jasmine April because he was due in April of 1989. Well, he was a boy, so I named him Javier. And 18 months later, I had an opportunity to put the name Jasmine in really good use on my daughter, Jasmine, who arrived in 1990 in October. And by the time she turned 3, she had her own Disney princess in the form of Princess Jasmine in Aladdin. The VHS for Aladdin was on constant repeat slash rotation with Barney. And that representation, as we now talk about it in our language, was important, but I didn't even realize it at the time, right? She is named Jasmine. She had her Princess Jasmine from when she was 3 years old. And even though that Jasmine in the Disney characterization was of, Egyptian, Middle Eastern descent, my daughter shares physical characteristics with that princess. So she was, in essence, represented by that Jasmine in form of Disney's Aladdin. And so she would dress up for Halloween as Princess Jasmine. In fact, she turns 35 in like a week. And I believe it was last Halloween she went as Princess Jasmine, right? So from that time of being 3 years old and seeing herself, quote unquote, reflected back on the screen to her, not to mention bearing the same name, to now in her mid 30s, she embodies that persona, that alter ego a little bit, or that, at least even that confidence of having known she gets called Princess Jasmine, etc. It wasn't until though 2009 that darker skinned black girls got our own princess as well, right? In the form of Tiana, of the Princess and the Frog, based exactly where I'm sitting right now, New Orleans, Louisiana. And that big character really took off, obviously, for many reasons in terms of representation for young black girls and black women around the world, and especially in America. Interestingly enough, just a quick sidebar, I recently heard Cree Summer. You know, Cree Summer has voiced so many characters. She and Regina King probably are like, have done more characters than anyone else I can name in our community. But Cree Summer mentioned that she had actually played a Princess Kita in the Atlantis, the Lost Empire. So, in fact, Cree Summer states that she was actually the first black princess in the Disney family, but they don't consider her, a princess on the level of Snow White, Cinderella, Tiana now, right? I think even Mulan and Pocahontas don't even get that status. So there's a lot of layers to this, right? From the perspective of who gets to be a Disney princess, and who's classified as a Disney princess. Now, just not to get completely off track, but I do want to say that while I had actually never heard of Atlantis, the Lost Empire, because I guess by the time that came out, yeah, in 2001, my kids had, cycled out of Disney. Although, of course, I heard of The Princess and the Frog and I watched it, but that was really specific. And we knew that, wow, this is a black New Orleans based Disney movie, right? So I didn't need my kids to be young for that. However, it's interesting when Cree Summer said that, I actually, for this recording, went and looked up Kita, this princess she's talking about in Atlantis, and I looked at her, and to be frank, I know that Cree Summer herself is a black woman who was, she's a biracial black woman who was voicing the character. However, on screen, that character had blonde slash white hair. So I wouldn't have taken away, at least not just looking at her, that she was a black princess in the Disney realm, right? But Tiana, we knew, right? She was right here. She like Creole. She was in there baking beignets, and so we knew we had us a black princess. And so, interestingly enough, about a week ago, I posted on my LinkedIn, and I mentioned the Disney hug rule, and posted a video of a young black girl completely head to toe dressed as Princess Tiana in the green ball gown, the earrings, the hairstyle, the I think she had on gloves too. I can't remember now. And Tiana came straight to her, and hugged her. Now let's talk back about that Disney rule. Hugged the little girl and then walked around the park with her. And I don't know, the video maybe is, I don't even think the video is 2 minutes long. And I posted it on my LinkedIn last week, and it's been seen by almost 100,000 people, um, over 250 comments, and shared. How many times this was shared? And shared an amazing amount of time. I'm just going to say that I scrolled away from it. Oh, there it is. And shared 150 times, and has thousands of likes and loves and support and hugs and hearts. And the main comments: representation matters. Why am I crying? Oh my goodness, we needed this. This little girl is never going to forget this moment. Thank you for sharing. And even, is someone cutting onions? I think it's a really common refrain, right? Getting teary. And I even had someone who came into my DMs, a gentleman said thank you. And there were a lot of thank yous, right, for sharing it for people who hadn't previously seen it. Or even one woman who actually said, I saw it. She commented on the post. I saw it and liked it, and it just came back by, and I've changed my like to a heart to love it. I love it. Gentleman, like I said, came into my direct messages and thanked me for sharing it, saying that he and his wife watched it and both cried. It's a video, right, of a little girl being hugged by a princess. That is not uncommon around Disney. What's uncommon, what is pulling at our hearts, is who is being hugged and who is hugging her. And the representation, the reflection of being anything you want to be. It's one thing to be told you can be anything you want to be, and then we got Barack Obama, and it was like, oh, I can be president, right? Uh, it's 2005. I'll leave that alone. But the point being, we did have a black president at one time, right? I also post Melody Hobson. She's a very extremely wealthy woman, and in her own right, and you know, presents herself in terms of being the first in her family to go to college, earn lots of money, make lots of money for other people in the finance industry. Um, Oprah Winfrey. I remember Oprah Winfrey crying on TV, um, recounting the first time she saw, like, I think it was Tina Turner or Diana Ross. I think it was Tina Turner was first on TV in America, but preceded Diana Ross, and crying, saying how they were able to watch Tina Turner on TV, and how everybody was crying and crowded around the TV. In fact, Ethel Waters was actually the first black woman to be on TV in 1939. But needless to say, a lot of people did not have TVs in their homes, and especially Oprah grew up, middle class, lower middle class, in those early years. So that representation of seeing yourself reflected is one thing. But the second part of that is being able to then be hugged in a way that validates your existence, right? I looked into some research because I wanted to see what is it that, I'm a little bit of a nerd, right? I'm a social scientist, by at least undergraduate training, and I'm really fascinated by how people interact with one another, and what it means to have this Black experience in America, as our lived experience. And then also in terms of, if I just step outside of it for a second and look back and say, oh, what does this look like? To look and reflect on it, right? So I could see the video when I posted it. I said, if you needed some softness and light today, here it is. And that's why I put it on LinkedIn. And I will link to it in the show notes. But it was the visceral impact, and the way that it reverberated, and it's still being commented on, and people are still reflecting on it and sharing it a week later, says a lot. And the comments, like I said, were so focused on how important the representation of the little girl seeing herself reflected back to her, and even women saying that healed something inside of my inner little girl. My inner child was healed because we didn't have that reflecting back to us, right? We didn't have that representation, at least not in the Disney universe. And there's so much of society that reflects back to us, quote unquote, and I'm putting reflection in air quotes, because there are images that are placed in front of us that are supposed to be a representation of us, right, that are not a representation of us. And that goes all the way back to the earliest days of Hollywood, and Birth of a Nation, which is an extremely horrible movie depicting us in probably the lowest and worst light possible. And it was actually shown in the White House at the time that it was released, right? So we have this history in America where the a lot of the images that for a very long time were shown to us as quote unquote a reflection of who we were either not controlled by us and also did not reflect what we knew and felt in our own lived experience, right? So there's all these layers to this. And I wanted to look up to see how important being Black is to Black people, right? So hear me out on this. If you know, you know, but if you don't, I want to explain it. Um, Recently, I actually had a conversation with a colleague in a very off campus way. The colleague happens to be like third or fourth generation French descended, white French descended, Louisiana resident, native, right? And so we have very open conversations. He's in his 70s and very sage and a nice man. And we talk about things very openly, and it feels safe when we are chatting with one another. And so we were talking about an incident that was actually an unsafe incident that had happened. And I experienced it, and it was what it was. And we were talking about it, but we were also in our own way using humor, right? As many of us do, to sort of just kind of decompress from the matter and be like, you know what? I'm not surprised that that person said that ridiculous thing, and they immediately realized that what they said was absolutely ridiculous, right? But it was too late. So to me, it was even more funny. I had more power in that moment because this person kind of showed their hand, right? So this gentleman and I were talking about that privately. And I don't know how it came up, but it almost was like in his frustration about I'll just call it with a very broad brush, the plight of the Black American, right? You could tell that there was like this weariness in him, and it was so interesting that it struck me that I said to him, you know, what's so interesting? I hear what you're saying, and I guess he was kind of lamenting, you know, the reality for Black Americans in America, right? In terms of socioeconomic issues and just social issues and political issues and all of that. And I looked at him and I was like, yeah, but if I die and come back, I'm coming back a Black woman. I will come back a Black woman every single day of every single week, right? And everybody I know who's Black says the same thing. But I said I'm a social scientist, so I just wanted to look into the data on this. And there was a first poll that I found that was put out by Pew Research Center back in 20, it was conducted in 2021. So this is after George Floyd, this is after Black Lives Matter erupts in 2020. And then it was released in April of 2022. So this happened, the data was collected in late 2021, and a figure of 76% of Black people, Black adults, considered being Black extremely, which was over 50%, or very, which was just over 20%, important to their identity. Black adults, 76% consider being Black extremely or very important to their identity, right? That was in 2021, right after Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. So I wanted to see if there'd been any data collected since then. And there has been a survey published by KFF, which is a healthcare policy nonprofit, in November 24, 20 in November 2024. They found that 83% of Black people feel that our racial identity was either very or extremely important to how we think about ourselves, right? So we identify. So it was 76% in 2021. By 2024, it was 83%, right? 83% of Black Americans surveyed said that it is extremely or very important to be Black and identify as Black. And yet, for however many generations since 1619, right, when our feet touched this ground in bondage capacity at least, um, that our blackness was not reflected back to us in a way of pride. And yet, and still, right? And yet, and still, we still hold on to the importance of that. So that's the representation side of things. So it's important for us to be reflected back in a way that's positive. And then, and then add to that that hug, that hug, that hug that doesn't get released until you release it. Being able to be hugged and comforted and seen and embraced and surrounded. Whew, I mean, that is the perfect storm. Those are all the ingredients necessary, right? To be able to have a black princess give a little black girl who looks like her, completely decked out in head to toe, accessories and all, a hug that doesn't end until that little girl says, "This hug can end." And for then us, and I did not go into the data for this, but there is data that there are brain waves that ping when you see an act of kindness as if that act of kindness was done to you. So now thousands, almost 100,000 in just my video. And of course, that video has been shared in many other places, right? So the reverberations, the ripple effects of how many times and how many millions of us have now had this opportunity to have this ping in our brain, this ping in our heart, right? And to be able to hug our inner daughter, not our, sorry, our inner selves, our inner little girl. For the fathers, lots of fathers commenting. One father said, "I have 4 little black daughters, and this is so important," right? The gentleman who he and his wife were crying, who came and DM'd me, for us in our own womanhood and for our daughters, our nieces, and on and on and on, right? So the representation and the hug, and then interestingly enough, we go from, let's say, hugs to and princesses to an angel walking the runway, right? So this week, if you did not see it, Angel Reese, basketball phenom, basketball player, also again Louisiana, right? And she walked the runway with confidence and swag and participated in all of the parts of the Victoria's Secret fashion show. And this is what Angel had to say about her participation.
A lot of women, young women, are going to be watching me today, knowing that they could be in this very moment. They should continue to dream really, really big.
So she is cognizant of who's watching her. She knows it's important. She understands the importance of the representation of her in this role on this stage with this level of exposure outside of her sports box, right? She is in a Victoria's Secret runway show and she understands that it's a dream for a lot of young girls or women, even, right? And also, it is an opportunity for them to see something that they can then aspire to. It's the Barack Obama, right? It's the Oprah Winfrey and Tina Turner. It is Angel Reese saying, "Look, dream, dream big. You can do it. Nothing is out of reach." It is a virtual hug from the runway, right? And so I just wanted to come in today and just let you know that you are seen, you are important, and that you also, while seeing potentially yourself reflected in your next level, also can serve as that mirror to someone coming up behind you, our daughters, our nieces, our little young girls all over, boys. You can be this potential Princess Tiana. You could be a princess and an angel, right? You could be Princess Tiana, Angel Reese for someone else. And so I want to thank you for tuning in today. I want to just say that you are so seen, and that I will post the video, the link to my LinkedIn so you can see it, the video I'm referring to. And I will also post a link to Angel Reese if you didn't get to check her out. I'll post a link to like a snippet somewhere on YouTube or something. And then also, I will post a picture of my 4 year old. I think she is in this picture. My 4 year old daughter, Jasmine, as Princess Jasmine, with her brother standing behind her, in holding his Aladdin saber, because it is important. Now, I'm gonna say this and be completely honest. I am not posting up the picture of her dressed as Jasmine the adult, for Halloween, and that's mainly because I don't have her permission to do it. She looked gorgeous though. Take my word for it. And if I get her permission, I will add it. But I'm not gonna reach out to her right now to ask that permission. So I will put up the young Jasmine, my Princess Jasmine. I send so much love to you and a Disney hug to you. And I thank you so much for tuning in. And I look forward to speaking with you on another episode of We All Win, the inspirational podcast for aspirational women of a certain age.